Good morning. Look at all you guys getting out in the snow. What are you thinking? It's dangerous out there. Kidding. Hey, this is no joke. We had a guy walk in a minute ago in a Badger hat. I was preaching. He walks in a Badger hat, and of course, my attention span would not allow me to keep preaching. I literally stopped the service. I'm like, what is that? It's a Badger hat. And I was hoping maybe there'd be another one. No. Step it up next service. I don't know what to say. How many of you guys this morning thought to yourselves, and you can be honest, no judgment, how many of you thought to yourselves this morning, like, they've been saying we have an online campus and that's a real campus and that's real church. Maybe we should just, am I alone? Because I was going to do that, but couldn't get away with it. Hey, so this week, Lacey and I are having our 12th wedding anniversary. For you guys online, Wickenburg, Adel, wherever you're at, for the people you just heard clapping, that's clapping for Lacey of like, wow, 12 years, that's crazy. Which is weird because Jet's 13, but no, I'm kidding, chill out. Lacey, I asked Lacey, and she asked for her anniversary, what she would like as gifts, if you're thinking that way, would be gift cards to like NRS and Cinder Butte Meat Company. She loves those things, so... It's also, hey, young people, I'm going to give you some advice. Pastoral, sage, 36-year-old wisdom. If you're thinking about getting married, if you get married after Valentine's Day, then all the stores do this fun little thing where they like front and they load up all the candy and roses and all the things that look like anniversary presents. And then after Valentine's Day, they go like 90% off. So if you're thinking about a wedding date, let me suggest like the 16th, 17th, 18th, something like that of February. You can walk in with armloads of like, just because I love you, honey, and like for 37 cents. They will load your cart for you if you just agree to take it out. So one of the things I'll say is this. In 12 years of being married, I've learned this concept, and that is the word spouse is probably Latin for knows all of your blind spots. You guys new to being married? Have you not discovered this yet? Like like after a certain few years of being married, your spouse, how fun is this? You are living with someone who knows you better than you know you. Because as people, we have blind spots. We have areas in our lives that we're not even aware of. Things that we just do that we don't even really know that we do, but your spouse knows that you do them. It's a very, very energetic group this morning. Maybe you're good with that. Maybe you're fine with the fact that you're living with someone who knows you better. But here's what I was not prepared for in marriage was this moment. Hey, can I just... And she's super sweet about it. Like, I'm married to the sweetest person on the planet. I was not prepared for the moments of, can I bring something to your attention? Like a dummy, the first couple times, I'm like, sure. Is it approval? It's probably approval. It never is. If it's approval, it doesn't need a qualifier. It doesn't need for her to go, can I bring something to your attention? What she's doing is she's going to... in love, point out something that she thinks that I need to see. Anybody been married? These are not the moments you prepare for. These are not the moments. I have a theory that The Bachelor is what is ruining marriage in America. And when I say theory, I use that term very loosely. We all know it. Because that is not... Married people, can we agree? Like that is like how? What about this one? My wife has years and years ago, not recently, had me watch a couple episodes of this show. Have you guys watched it? It's this. I just know in my heart I love him. It's the craziest thing. Were you excited to meet him? Yeah, I guess, but I already know. What if we set you up on a perfect date in a beautiful place and we pay for it? Do you think you could maybe fall in love? And thousands of people are like, I guess we could give it a try. You are not prepared for, can I can I bring something to your attention? Those moments don't make the show. You know, it's the I cannot believe. When someone knows you, it lands different than when someone doesn't know you. What I'm not talking about is criticism. Here's something that can bounce. I've got thick skin with criticism. If somebody doesn't know me very well and they go, you know, you're just so, I got all day. Say whatever you want to say. Like, I can take criticism. It doesn't really bug me that much because it's not from someone who knows me. But if there's a correction from someone who does know me, it lands differently. And if you're being honest, you would admit it lands differently with you too. That's where in a marriage, when an argument turns to the, I cannot believe you just went there, to the no-go argument zone. And it's even worse. You know what I love about these kind of sermons? I get laughter from people with gray hair. That is my favorite because they're like, welcome to the club. It's worse when it's accurate. I know this. I know that in Proverbs, and I'll read it to you. Proverbs says it this way. It says that, where'd I go? I lost it. This is what happens if I don't have notes. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 11 says, my son, do not despise the Lord's discipline. Do not resent his rebuke. Because the Lord disciplines, another translation says corrects. The Lord corrects those who he loves. And as a father, the son he delights in. One of the things that we're seeing happen is this weird brand of Christ following that says, I'm all about God's approval on my life, and I'm not interested in his correction. Like, how many times do you hear people get offended when the pastor reads something out of the Bible, but it comes across a little too harsh? Well, I just don't like how that was delivered. Well, I just don't think that if it were me, blah, blah, blah. It's like the flavor of the national church right now is that if it's not delivered in a way that we like, then we don't like it because we are not geared. Listen, we are not a society that is geared towards correction. And for good reason. I will be the first to admit I don't love moments of correction. I hate moments of correction because I hate being wrong. Imagine Lacey and I being married for the first few years because neither one of us like being wrong. I don't mean competitively. I mean genuinely, we don't like to be wrong. And when there's a moment where we are aware that a moment of correction is needed, it is super uncomfortable. And how many of you guys know this? That when it's someone who knows you the best, they can cause the most amount of hurt. Not even intentionally. Someone that you know the most, the person that you are the closest to, has the ability to hurt you the worst because they know you. And in correction, when you don't pre-plan moments of correction, then what happens is moments of correction feel like moments of disapproval. Have you ever had somebody bring something to your attention in love, but it doesn't feel like love? It just feels like disapproval? We're becoming a nation who says, hey, just don't even, let's just not even go there. I have my truth, you have your truth, and that, if we're not careful, begins to seep into the church. And we become a church who says, let's not deal with areas of correction because correction feels like disapproval. And we don't like it. I remember some of our first years of marriage, and we couldn't even get to what we would bring up to each other. Like if we had something we wanted to bring up to each other, we couldn't even get to that. Because if you know how correction works, it goes correction is introduced, justification, denial. Like before you can even get to where you're getting better about something, you have to go through all the phases. And ultimately you have to get to a place where you can accept the correction. It is not easy. I think we've extremely undervalued how difficult it is to be people who can be corrected. I am not talking about criticism. If you're around someone who's constantly just pecking at you, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when moments where someone who loves you, like think it says that God, because God loves you, he corrects you, he engages with you, it's relational, it's personal, he gets involved in your life, and yet, if we're not ready for that, what happens is we pull back from it. We know this. We know that men, I'm going to talk to the men for a second. Men are dying in this country at a younger age due to what is called deaths of despair. We've talked about this. Deaths related to despair. Addiction, suicide, things that are isolated related deaths. If you want to do the study yourself, you can. But what it indicates is that a nation, as men, we would rather pull back and hide our shortcomings or our failures than face correction. Because as men, when we have to address our failure or address our shortcomings, it feels like failure as a person. So it's just easier if no one gets to see the backstage, everyone gets to see the stage presentation, and we just hide the areas where we're struggling or where we're failing. Let me tell you something, guys. We have got to get better about having a group of people that we can confide in, a group of men that we can trust and that we can be open with. We've got to get better about letting our spouses into what's going on in our lives. We're not good at it. And as a result, statistically, men are literally dying as a result of what? Isolation. So I'm aware of the fact that moments of correction are not fun. But the only thing worse than moments of correction is if we are someone who never has them. If we're people who just reject or avoid correction altogether, the consequences of that are much greater than the discomfort of having a real open conversation with something about what's going on in our lives with somebody who genuinely loves us. I think the risk is this. If you saw who I really was, would you still love me? Am I still worth loving if you saw the part of my life that I'm not proud of? And I think it's twofold because I think we're asking ourselves that question. If I were to turn and face my own failure and my own shortcoming, am I somebody that I could love? Genesis chapter 3 says this in verse 7. It says, then the eyes of both of them, this is Adam and Eve after the fall, were open and they realized they were naked. They sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Where there is failure, shame is not far behind. Shame has this weird way, and I've talked about this a lot, and it feels like it's this theme that just circles back every now and then, is that shame is always lurking in the shadows. Shame is always attaching itself to failure. The definition of shame is that feeling of humiliation associated with knowing when we're wrong. Shame is the thing that attaches itself, and now it's not I did wrong, it's that I am wrong. Do you see what I'm saying? Shame is always from the beginning, and what we're going to see is that in Adam and Eve's life, the minute they experienced failure, they instantly felt shame. This is the first mistake ever made by humanity, and the next moment, shame was right there ready to leap. You've got to understand that shame in your life is always looking for an opportunity to manifest itself. They demonstrated this by saying this, I'll handle it. I'll handle it. We realize that we're in a predicament here. We don't like what's going on. I think women probably go through this too, but I know for a fact men go through this. We find ourselves in a situation like, we'll handle it. We'll deal with it. We got this. I got this. And someone goes, hey, I can help. I don't need help. I got this. I'm all right. I got this. I got a plan. Wives, put your elbows away. I got this. I can handle it. I got a niece that I just absolutely adore. Her name is Holland Rose Weaver. She's this little blonde-headed, cutest little girl you've ever seen. She wears glasses, and her glasses make her big blue eyes even bigger and more intent, and she's just the cutest little thing. And the thing that I love about her is that she's pretty naughty. She just is. And I mean, that's just part of her life, and I just adore her. Well, my brother, Levi, he comes in one night, and Holland has written blue ink onto her face. So my brother says, hey, did you draw on your face? Well, now we know Holland is dealing with shame because she's aware of the fact that she's wrong, but she's not willing to face the fact that she's wrong. She's not looking for a moment of correction. She's looking for a moment of justification, okay? And she's little, and she's doing what we all do, but she doesn't disguise it as well as we do. There comes a point where we get really good at disguising. She's not that good at it. She looks at my brother, and she goes, no. And Levi's like, I wasn't prepared for no because I thought we were past the, like, you obviously, okay, we're going to lie. Okay. And he goes, well, what's on your forehead? And Holland says this. It's a bug bite. But she's not done. She's not done. She sells it. She says, it's a bug bite. And she scratches it. Holland, the reason that's funny is that Holland is all of us. We've all been in this situation where someone that we love, someone who knows us, brings up something that we're already embarrassed of, that we're already ashamed of, that we already don't want to deal with. And they go, do you want to talk about it? And we go, I got it. I got this. I'm handling it. Life is under control. I'm managing it. I would rather manage it myself than risk letting you in on my failures. You can see my successes. You don't get to see my failures. It's a bug bite. And like, nobody believes you, and you're like, I can live with that. I can't live with an open, honest discussion about things that I'm failing at. Because I don't know, if you see what I'm failing at, I don't know if you'll still love me. And we do this with God too. And we come to church, and it's almost as though we behave like if we turn and face the thing that we're struggling with, will God still feel the same way about me? Could God possibly love me as much in my failure as he does in my success? Hey, when we bring someone to church that's like struggling and having a hard time, and we bring them into church, we're like, hey, God, you're welcome. When we spiritually on our hands and knees crawl into church after a week of being a terrible Christian, we're like, we're just going to sit in the corner. Verse 8. Says, then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And what'd they do? They ran to God and they said, we've messed up. We've made a mistake. We need your help. No. It says that listen, your justification, your efforts to avoid correction almost never make sense. It's literally like my little cousin, when she was bedtime, I'm like, all right, it's bedtime. She wouldn't go hide under a blanket. She would just put a pillow over her own head. And I wonder sometimes spiritually how many times we're just putting a pillow over our own head because in the middle of our guilt and our frustration, shame comes in and we're like, we're just going to handle it. And it says they went and hid from God. Where were they going to go? Did they discuss this? And they're like, I bet he couldn't find us. It says that they just reacted. They're in reaction mode. They're in crisis mode. And shame is the crisis management program. Shame is running the show. Says, but the Lord called and said to the man, where are you? He said, I heard you in the garden and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. Rule number 1, shame runs. You ever been in an argument and the moment you realize you're losing the argument because you're wrong, you're like, I can't do this right now. I got to go mow the lawn. It's February. I said I have to go. Because shame runs. Shame is like, I can't do this right now. Shame runs to a few places. Sometimes shame runs to Facebook. I am friends with some of you. I know this works. Vague. Oh, I guess I'm not good enough. No one's ever going to love me, blah, blah, blah. Shame runs to Facebook and looks for approval. Shame runs to the bar. Shame runs to work. Shame runs to your mom to find someone who will agree with you. Is this too personal? Like, I don't want to get like in your business. I'm just saying shame runs. Shame sees the issue and is like, I'll be right back. I got to get out of this. Shame runs. We're unable to hide. That didn't work. God finds him. And so in verse 11, he said, who told you that you were naked? See, he's saying what he's addressing, what God is addressing is not the guilt. What God is addressing is the shame. God says, we can't even get to correction. I'm addressing the shame first because what they were doing in shame is they were making an effort to handle it themselves. I'm going to manage this myself. Find me some leaves. And then it says, have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from? The man said, the woman you put here with me, she did it. This is her fault. And so he goes to Eve. Eve, is this true? And she goes, the serpent did it. Because rule number 2, shame attacks. When shame can't run, the claws come out. And shame is like, oh, really? oh, you think I have a problem? Well, because I remember, have you ever been in an argument or a moment of guilt, or you're talking with somebody and you know that they're starting to understand, like, and out of nowhere, something's introduced to the argument, but it doesn't make sense. It's like, oh yeah, well, what about last week when we went to the grocery store and I told you to get bananas and you didn't? And you're like, are we, what? Because shame can't just say, hey, you're right, I'm sorry. Shame has to go, well, if I'm going down, everybody's going down with me. I do a lot for this house. I feel super underappreciated. We're laughing because it is just so common. Shame runs and shame attacks. It didn't work, so now the justification. Doesn't this sound like a young person or a young marriage's approach to a disagreement or to a moment of correction? Now, keep in mind, God said, if I love you, I will correct you. You will come to church and God will say, you say this, but I say this. And it's up to you to decide what you're going to do in those moments. The preacher says, well, the Bible says this, and you go, well, but I think this. And when you and God don't agree, that's kind of up to you at that point what you're going to do with it. Because what we tend to do is, I'm not going back to that church, because shame runs. Or we go, you know, that pastor, he just thinks he's so perfect, and I'm not going to that church because I feel judged. And I sat there at the church, and like nobody said hi. That's not what we do here. We're not a church that's designed to like attack people when they walk in with hellos. And like, I don't know about you guys. Sometimes when I go to a new place, I like to just walk in and sit down, and like we try to make that like an okay thing. Like if you come in and you don't want to engage with a bunch of people, you just want to come in and sit down. Like we want to honor that, and that's okay. But if you're looking for a moment to run, I'm never going back. You're looking for a moment to attack. Instead of going, hey, he said something and I didn't like it because it's not how I do things. We go, well, that preacher's not perfect. Hey, can I just go ahead and break the secret? I'm not perfect. I might be less perfect than anyone else who calls themselves a pastor. Like, trashy? Sure, yeah. Informal? Lots of that. Perfect? I couldn't hit perfect with a deer rifle. But there's moments where instead of accepting correction, we come up with a plan. We have a plan. We're going to address it. We're going to manage it. And God's going, I'm not asking you for a plan. I'm not asking you to manage it. I'm asking you to change. It's crazy because in 2019, that alone is almost an offensive statement. That if God would ask you to change, oh, so he disapproves of where I am. We have to come to terms with the fact that if we're going to get anywhere in life, we have got to be people who can absorb correction. And shame will see to it that that never happens. So that means the biggest hurdle we have in our lives between who we are and who we need to become is shame. That's a whole nother sermon. Sometimes, because, okay, so Adam and Eve, you sinned, you're wrong, here's the consequences, and you're out. Right? God kicks them out, right? Well, let me tell you. Just because you're taught something correctly doesn't mean that you're going to understand it correctly. Teachers, you'll understand what I'm saying. Sometimes you teach a student and the student's like, got it. Well, you want to know, like, does the student actually understand what I taught him? So what do? You give them a test. And sometimes teachers, have you ever got a test back and you're like, see, this is why we do the test. You honestly know nothing about what I taught you. As the recipient of a lot of red ink in my life, I get this process. I'm not saying I was taught wrong about what happened in the garden. What I am saying is I didn't understand it correctly. I'm not placing the blame on pastors or preachers or teachers or anybody who taught me about the word, but I will tell you, I misunderstood what happened next. My dad, one time he had a horse named Spud. Terrible horse name. And I was 4 years old. And I was a hot-tempered 4-year-old at that. And I'm riding my dad's horse, and we're getting ready to rope. And so he asked me to go warm his horse up, and which meant I was going to get on his horse, ride him down the road to the arena where this place where we were staying at the time. And I was going to ride into the arena and lope his horse around so that when he got there, everything was good. I loved it. It was great. Good situation. I get to the arena. The horse will not go in. Will not go in. And I'm 4, and so I'm limited on my options. Like, what am I going to do? And so I did what any 4-year-old would do. I rode back to my dad, and I tattled. And I'm like, you're a stupid horse. Well, listen, my dad meant well. What he thought he was telling me was good information. He gave me a little barrel racing little thing, little enforcer. And he said, if he stops, just tap him with it. Now, looking back, this makes sense, okay? But I'm 4. Just tap him with it, because like horses, sometimes they're just seeing if you're serious or not. And I'm like, oh, I'm dead serious. Okay, good. Okay, we'll see in a bit. So now I head off to the arena, 4 years old, hot-tempered 4 years old, and I'm like, oh, please stop. Please stop, because now I'm armed, and I got a plan. Please stop. And the horse apparently didn't speak 4-year-old because he didn't understand what was going on. Did I mention I had horrible language as a 4-year-old, a preacher's kid and grandkid and nephew with horrible language. I was an awful little 4-year-old. We get to the mouth of the arena, and he stops. Well, what my dad said was tap him. Well, that's not what I heard. I grew up too close to Oklahoma. If you're watching this in Oklahoma, you should know more than anyone how true this is. What my dad meant was just reach back on his hip, but he didn't say that. I'm not saying he gave me bad information, but I didn't hear it correctly. So what I did is I brought it from yesterday all the way into tomorrow, and bam, right over the ears, and just it wraps over his head, just pow, right in the middle of his forehead. I was so proud of myself. I'm like, take that, you sucker. Well, he's a prey animal, so what he does when he's attacked from above is he just wheels around and takes off down the gravel road. I hung on just long enough for him to two things, for him to reach top speed and my shoes to fall off. And he had this little mane. My dad had roached his mane, and it had grown out about this long. To this day, I still remember holding on. And what I learned was sometimes you can get bad information. It's questions are your friend. Why did I just tell that story? Here's why. The concept matters. What happens next in the garden will define the shape of your understanding of who God is. If we have an inaccurate God concept, we're going to take it out on everybody else around us. If we think of God as the get out, that's it. You screwed up, that's it, you're out. Then we become Christians who say, that's it, you screwed up, you're out. And that is not what took place. Listen to this. Genesis chapter 4. So this is after Adam and Eve have messed up and they've had the consequences explained to them. This is after. This is Cain and Abel, and they're living out in this world outside of the garden. They're no longer, because of consequences, no longer able to live within the garden. And I always thought it's because God just kicked them out of the garden. But this, it says, now Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some fruits from the soil as an offering to the Lord, and Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from the firstborn of his flock. Here's what doesn't add up. It's like a math equation that it's got to add up on both sides of the equal sign, okay? What we're seeing is that Cain and Abel, because of their sacrifices, they are demonstrating hope. If you go, how'd you get that? Why else would they do it? If the relationship was severed and that's it, get out, it's over, why would Cain and Abel bother to go through the expense and the hassle of making sacrifices or atonement? It just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't add up. And I've heard this before, and I've never dug any deeper. But the reality is that in demonstrating this sacrifice and in demonstrating this offering to God, what they were demonstrating is hope. Where? What? How? Because if God said, that's it, it's over, get out, sacrificing, it makes sense. The hope that they're demonstrating had been learned from who? Adam and Eve. So that means that even though they're no longer in the garden, please follow the logic on this. Even though Adam and Eve were no longer in the garden, something had taken place that gave Adam and Eve relational hope. They had experienced correction. They had not experienced death. So much so that when they had kids, they passed that truth on to their kids and said there's hope. Which means this: if your whole life you believed that God said, that's it, you're done, get out, we have a misshapen God concept. It says this. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 3. It says that God addresses the guilt. Here's what you don't want. You don't want God to stop addressing your guilt. Here's what you don't want in a marriage is a wife or a husband who ignores everything. Listen, an absentee father, a father who has kids and then just disappears, you know what he does not provide his kids? Correction. But the absence of correction does not equal love or acceptance. Please, this is important that we get this. So this idea that God corrects us in anger or disapproval does not hold water. That God is willing to correct us demonstrates love and demonstrates an engagement with us at a personal level. And so many times, shame comes in and says, if God is correcting you, he's disapproving of you because we have a misshapen God concept. Listen to this. In Genesis chapter 3, after the correction, after the explanation of consequences, I believe this. I believe that God was brokenhearted as he's explaining to Adam and Eve that this garden cannot allow a sin nature. It's got to be separate, which means in your actions, you've now separated yourself from this garden, but it's not over. I have a plan to redeem. I have a plan to forgive. I have a plan even in your failure, even in your most disgusting, most hidden, in your shortcomings, in your failure, that as Adam and Eve stood in front of God, covered in failure, God did this. Are you ready? Verse 21, it says, the Lord made garments of skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them. There is a Bible's worth of message and imagery in that verse. He says, first thing we got to do is we got to address your shame. Before we get to the consequences, before you're going to live this new life and live in these new consequences, and before you're going to experience all this, you got to know your shame has to go right now. God addressed your shame instantly. Your shame has no place in God's plan for your life. If you're dealing with shame, it is not because God put it there. God has never said, shame on you. You should be ashamed of yourself. Look at this thing. You're a failure. You're a mess up. God has gone to great lengths to demonstrate that at the expense of another life, at the expense of a life that was not yours, at the expense of an innocent life, he would cover your shame. Do you see the imagery in that? All the way back in Genesis chapter 3, God says, at the expense of an innocent life, I will cover your shame. Your shame has been covered, period. End of discussion. If you're carrying shame around that's running from God or hiding from God or on the attack, that is not from God, and it needs to be addressed. It is causing damage in your walk with God. It's causing damage in your relationship. It is hurting you. But then that's not all. I think of a clothes in the front yard moment. Anybody had that? We actually never have, but there's time. I'm kidding. I would never throw her clothes in the yard. God didn't say, fine, there's your stuff. You're going to need it. It says that God said, come here. It's cold out there. You're going to need this. Life is going to be difficult, but I have a plan. But in the meantime, here, your arms go here, your legs go here, this button's here, this zip's there. There's an intimacy in their moment of failure. There's an intimacy like a loving dad who says, I see it, but I've got a plan for it. But in the meantime, I want you to know that I love you and I care for you, and I look forward to the day when we get past what has taken place here. that's a different concept than God saying, you messed up, you're out. He is addressing correction, but in a loving, intimate, involved way that says, even in the moment of correction, you are loved. I think it's important. I think there's sometimes I kind of back away from moments of correction as a pastor because what I don't want to do is offend. I don't want to drive anybody out before God has this moment. But the reality is, one of the defining personalities of our church should be that we can reject criticism and that we appreciate correction. My prayer for all of us is that God would send somebody into our lives that loves us the way that a parent loves a child, the way that a spouse loves a spouse. Moments of correction from people who know us and love us, because that's the hard combination, isn't it? See, I think sometimes social media trains us to be loved by people who don't know us. And everybody understands what it's like to be known but not loved. God says, my plan for you is that you be known and loved. And my prayer is that God would send us people who are willing to be honest and in moments of difficulty, willing to offer correction to our benefit. But more importantly than that, that we're people who can accept correction. Here's what correction, break this word down. I mean, the most basic, simple terms. If you think of it like if I'm walking through the house and my kids, they have their toy train and the toy train has fallen off the tracks and it's just spinning up its wheels. It's not disapproving to go, oh, you're off the rails. That's not your best opportunity. That's not your best life. I'm not disapproving of the train. I'm saying it's just, that's not how it was designed to work. When we say, God, we depend on your correction. He says he corrects those he loves. When we go, God, we're not interested in correction, what we're saying is, God, don't love us. God, we're not interested in your love. We just want the approval. And God goes, that's not how it works. Correction is the moment where God goes, if you'll take that train and just put it back on the tracks, see, it works better. And shame goes, I guess I'm stupid. I guess I just fall off the rails all the time. God, I guess I'm just emotional. Shame does a lot of weird things. Correction says, you're right. This is super lighthearted, but I remember the first time my wife said this. She says, just a thought. Oh, yeah, well, what? She goes, you're not a teenager anymore. Maybe you should stop buying Hollister t-shirts. I was so offended. It had never crossed my mind. Like, I wasn't trying to, dress to disguise my age. That's what I'd always done. That's where I just always shopped. You need a shirt, you go to the store. That or Goodwill. Everybody knows that. She wasn't saying it in disapproval. She was seeing something that I wasn't seeing. And as much as I wanted to be like, well, guess what? You're not a teenager. No. Sometimes moments of correction come in out of nowhere. And I think if we are predisposed to accept correction, our life gets easier. When we read something in the Bible and it is different than the way we practice life, those moments are easier if we can just face it and go, I'm not good at that, but I want to be. God, allow us to be people who can absorb correction and be better for it. God, let us be people who have people in our lives who see our blind spots and that know us and that love us. Allow us, God, to be people who can be corrected. Because it says that when he loves you, he corrects you. But even in correction, you're not getting kicked out of his good graces. In fact, at the expense of a life, he's covered your shame. And he is saying, I look forward to the day when this is all over. Let's pray. God, I look forward to the day where you correct us. God, where things get better. Lord, where you address things in our lives that we can improve on. But Lord, we can't get there unless we're people who are predisposed to accept correction. We got to be people who can accept a better way of doing things. God, we've got to be able to accept those moments where you take our broken way of doing things and you set it back on a track that's more in line with the word, that's more in line with your spirit, that allows freedom and movement and allows us to live a life more in alignment with who you've created us to be. God, we can't get to alignment without correction. God, give us discernment between the difference between criticism and correction. God, send us people who are willing to lovingly correct and help us to have thick skin in moments where people don't know us, but they're critical. Help us to know the difference. God, show us your heart on things. Show us the area where we're different than your best desire for us. God, show us areas where we're not in alignment with your best plan for our lives. Allow us to redirect our hearts and our spirits and our minds and our will. God, just align our will to your goal for our life. Pray in Jesus' name, amen.